Hi everyone, welcome to the sew along video for pattern 1812, do the twist top. So this pattern is for a knit fabric, so when you're ready, thread up your overlocker with 4 threads of colour that match your fabric. You're also going to need access to either a cover stitch machine or a home sewing machine with a twin needle to complete the hem, or you could just use your overlocker and a long stitch length on a plain sewing machine. I'll show you that as we go through the video. So we're going to need an overlocker and a plain sewing machine. So this pattern is made with 6mm, which is 1/4 inch seam allowances, and it's not made to be cut. So what that means is when we're sewing with our overlocker, we don't need to cut any fabric off with that blade. That blade is designed simply to trim off any fraying threads or just to tidy up the fabric as we go. For your plain sewing machine, you're going to need to make sure you have put a ball needle into it. That will stop the fabric from piercing the threads and causing a run or a ladder. And also it's a good idea to lengthen your stitch length slightly from normal. So if your normal stitch length is 2.5, somewhere around 3.5, 4 might be more appropriate for that, but make sure you check that with some spare fabric before you begin. So when you're ready, let's get started. So to make this pattern the easiest possible way to sew, I've designed it so that the front is a pair, which is also known as a mirror piece. If you wanted to save fabric, as long as your fabric was two-sided, you could sew this as a 1-layer front. You just would need to be very careful with your construction sequence and make sure that your seams sit in the correct way. And the only way you'll understand that is if you try and sew that. But to make it really easy to sew, I've just designed this with a 2-layer front. So let's get started on the front piece. So take your mirror pair of fronts and place them right sides together. If we look at the pattern, you'll see one of the edges has a double notch on it. So that edge there is our shoulder. So when you're matching it, make sure that the curves all match like this. The first seam we're going to sew is the center front area. So this is the cowl. So come and look for this seam here, which is the shoulder with the double notch in it. We don't want to sew the shoulder quite yet. We want to sew this seam running off it, which is nice and long and straight. So all we're doing is matching the raw edge, and we want to overlock that together. As you come along, you will find a notch. So that notch shows us the center front position. So make sure that those notches match. Okay, so this is where we started from up here. So what I'd like you to do now is just turn that, and that seam there with that notch there is the side seam. So turn it again, and if you just look above that area, we're back on the other side, and the seam looks identical to where we started. So we're back at a shoulder with 2 notches. So now we want to start sewing again here to the right of the shoulder seam, which is our other side of our center front. So place this piece somewhere safe and then take your back piece and open it right side up. So now we're going to overlock the neckline. So if you come to the hem area, you'll see at the side seam there are notches here to show us the seam allowance. So when you're ready, turn that up and cover stitch that into place. Now if you don't have access to a cover stitcher, you can do what I'm doing, or you could just use a twin needle on a domestic sewing machine. So what I'm going to do is just overlock the edge to secure it. And now I'm going to move across to my plain stitcher. So here at the hemline you can see there's a notch, and this notch is patterned at 1.5 centimeters, which is 9/16 of an inch. So that notch simply tells us or shows us where to turn this. So turn that at the notch position and then go to your iron if you need to and press this into place. I'm not going to bother, I'm just going to follow the stitch guides on my sewing machine, but that's entirely up to you. And I'm going to sew my first line of stitching right on top of that overlocking, just to hide it a little bit. The other thing to note is I've put a ball needle into my machine, so that will stop any runs or ladders in my fabric, and I've lengthened my stitch length slightly. So my stitch length is normally set on 2.5, which is 20/5, and I've lengthened this to 4. Now just because I like the look of a cover stitcher and I want to mimic the look of a cover stitcher, I'm going to sew a second line of top stitching parallel to the first line and on the side that has the fold. And I'm going to do this from the right side simply because I can. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my iron and press that seam into place. It will just help set the stitches into the fabric. So as you can see, pressing this seam makes a huge difference, and as a rule of thumb you generally sew a seam and press a seam as you go. So now we're going to turn the neckline under and stitch that into place as well. And the seam allowance for the neckline is 1 centimeter, which is 3/8 of an inch. So turn that to the wrong side and sew that into place, or cover stitch that into place if you haven't access to a cover seamer. So take your front piece and turn it so that it is right side out. And then find a shoulder. So remember, the shoulder is one of the seams that has 2 notches cut out of it. So here is the overlocked seam, and here is the shoulder with the double notches. So what we're going to do now is sew this shoulder into place. Now you could just place it right sides together and overlock the seam in, but what I like to do is just sandwich that into place just to create a nice seamless area around the neckline. So take your back piece and place it right side down. What we want to do is match the neck edge that we finished with that seamed edge there, and we're just going to butt it in really tight against that seam, and then we're going to wrap this piece over the top. So what we're doing is we're going to overlock the shoulder into place, and it will just be sandwiched in between there. So take your time getting this into position. You need to make sure that's really buttered up really tight against that seam, and then wrap this other one back over the top until you have 3 layers. Then hold it in place really firmly and overlock. So when you overlock, make sure all those raw edges are together. So as you fold that back and come to this neck edge, what you will see has happened is that we now have a very nice smooth transition between the shoulder here, and this is the back neck, and the front cowl drape. Okay. So now we're going to sew a sleeve into place. So this is the back neck, and this is the front, and this is our shoulder. The sleeves are identical, so it doesn't matter which one you use, just make sure you place it right side together. So this is right side up, we're going to place our sleeve right side down. I'm going to come to the underarm point here and match that into place. I'm just going to hold it with a pin, mainly because this fabric is very stretchy, it's very curly, much more so than I thought. And then at the apex of the sleeve you will find a notch, and that's called the crown notch, and that's going to match to the shoulder seam here, and I'm going to fix that in place with a pin. And then our last point is we need to get the 2 layers of the front underarm here matched up, and then we want to take this other side of the sleeve and match that into place there, and hold that with a pin. So when we overlock this together, if there's any ease that needs stretching out, we need to do it between those points there. Okay, so now we have our sleeve sewn into place. What I'm going to do is, because I don't have a cover stitcher, I'm just now going to overlock that raw edge of the hem, just because I'm here and I can. If you have a cover stitcher, you can skip this step till later. And because I've done that to one sleeve, I may as well just go ahead and do that to the other. So even though I wouldn't normally go ahead and do this, this is a really good time now to sew in the side seam and the underarm on the side. So take your piece and face it right sides together, matching the sleeve hem area, and overlock up the underarm and then through the side seam. Make sure when you reach the underarm that those seams are sitting on top of each other. And now as we come through the side seam, what you're going to notice is we've now transitioned to 3 layers. As you go down the side, there is a notch you can match there. So as you come towards the hem, what we want to make sure is that the fold is on the very edge and it matches against the very edge of our hemline. And leave a bit of a tail because we'll tidy that up again soon. So turn this so it is right side out with the front facing forward. So now we need to sew the other shoulder into place, and we're going to have to twist the front. So I find the easiest way is to come to the shoulder we've just sewn, come down the side seam and along the bottom, and when you get to the bottom at the end of our overlocking, pick that up and lift it towards the other shoulder and pin that in place. The reason I'm pinning it is I just want you to check. When this garment is sewn, we want the right side as you're wearing it to be folding over the top of the left side, just to get the drape correct. So that is what we want. So you need to make sure when you rearrange your work, that is the way it is sitting. If you're happy that that is in the correct orientation, we're now going to sew the other shoulder into place. So you can take that pin out, and we're going to go ahead and sandwich that seam in just like we did before. So to do that, just make sure that seam is butted up to that edge, then take this front piece and wrap it over to the back. Now if this is too much for you, you can certainly just match it right sides together and overlock it. You don't have to do what I'm doing now. And my suggested construction sequence is only a suggestion. You're welcome to sew this pattern any way you like. So when you have that edge butted in just like we did earlier, go ahead and overlock that shoulder seam. We want to make sure all those notches match together and that we're overlocking through 3 layers. Now if you take this top layer and roll it back, hopefully you will find a lovely smooth transition. So now let's sew the other sleeve into place over here. And of course if you've decided to sew this sleeveless, all you need to do is sew a hem here at 1 centimetre. So if you were sewing this sleeveless, all you would do would be to come here and turn that under, cover stitch it. Right, so take your other sleeve and sew that into place. Okay, and now we'll sew that sleeve underarm and the side seam. So do exactly what we did before, fold this right sides together and sew. Okay, so now we're just going to move across to the plain sewer and just tidy off the hems here and do the sleeves as well. So if you have access to a cover stitcher, now's the time to do your sleeve hems. Just turn them up at the notch and stitch them down. If you're doing it the way I am, just turn it up at the notch and sew a line of stitching, or you could always sew put a twin needle in a domestic sewing machine and sew that way. So what I'm going to do is turn my hem allowance up. I'm just trimming the tail of my overlocking back to a couple of centimetres, so not quite an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch, tucking it up, and then I'm going to sew a line of stitching on my overlocking line. And so just so my garment looks consistent, I'm going to do another line of stitching, the same as I did for my hem. You don't have to, it's entirely up to you. I'm just turning my garment inside out because I like to do that second line from the right side. Now bear in mind, if you do it this way, these hems might snap, the threads might break, because they won't have as much give as you would if, say, you had used a cover seamer or a twin needle. So just bear that in mind. If you put too much tension on them as you pull your arm through, they will snap. Like in general wear and tear, they should be okay, but they're certainly not as good as using a cover stitcher. And when you've done one side, go ahead and complete the same for the other sleeve hem. Tuck that into the seam allowance, tuck it up at the notch position. And now's a good time to do some quality control work, so just go ahead and snip any stray threads that you might see. Right, so let's come down to the side seam hems. Now as we sewed them, what's going to happen is you're going to have had a little tail on the end there. So what I always find is easier if you trim this tail back to a couple of centimetres, 3/4 of an inch, and then we're going to roll it up the side seam, and then just stitch that tail down on top of that overlocking line. So a couple of stitches forward and back, and then just trim off any stray threads, and that will just make a nice tidier line for you. And do the same on the other side. Okay, so thanks for joining me with this sew along video. I hope you enjoy your garment, and I hope you can join me for my next sew along video soon.